Afternoon all, thank you for coming. It's good to see that much interest. As Fiona said, my name is Mick English. I've been in aviation since 1960. As a pilot, commercial pilot, fixed and rotary wing, as an engineer since 1970, also in fixed and rotary wing. I've been in CASA for nearly 20 years, and a large part of that time I've been trying to get underway a simplification of the 1988 regulations under which we carry out general aviation maintenance. I think it's pretty well universally accepted that those 88 regs are very complex, very difficult to navigate. When they were written, they had to accommodate everything from the single seat Cassett racer, for instance, to a 747. Now that we have Part 42 and Part 145, the 88 regs no longer contemplate commercial air transport, therefore a lot of the complexity built into them is redundant and just troublesome for GA. So, next, how did we get here? A few years ago, the reg reform program was reinvigorated. Some years back, of course, we got parts 42, 66, 145 and 147 up. I can't pretend for a minute that GA is happy with any of that. I understand. Now we have 5 major projects that we're pursuing over the next few years. Part 66, 145 and Part 21 are definitely being reviewed right now. That will be formally announced soon. Part 145 will formally be announced and Part 21 will be formally announced sometime next year. And we're looking at simplification. We need to simplify these rules to make them more user-friendly, particularly for GA. We recognise that that's where most of the problems are. Part 121 will be undergoing a review to make sure it realigns with its parent regulation, which really was the FAR Part 21. And we've diverged away a bit. We're going to try and pull it all back. But the big ticket one at the moment is continuing airworthiness for GA and aerial work. And next year, there'll be a separate project looking at continuing airworthiness for charter aircraft. And we haven't included in this project because it's just too big a bite for us to chew in one go. Remember how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Well, that's how we're doing it. Next one, please. The applicability. Oh, sorry, I've overshot. Yeah, the Deputy PM announced back in May, I think it was, that we're going to do something with GA maintenance regs, that they're going to be simpler, more cost effective, and most importantly, based on an established working set from one of the other recognised NAAs. The guiding principles, and these certainly were not negotiable in our view, they have to happen. We have to get rid of inappropriate levels of safety or inappropriate regulations that provide unnecessary overburdening safety requirements. Keep it appropriate. ICAO compliance. Everything we do from now on, we're going to be ICAO compliant. International harmonisation. That's important. Mainly because by harmonising with an existing, successful, proven regulation suite, we will probably not make the mistakes we've been famous for making in the past. And we're looking for cost neutral or savings. We don't want this to be just another bloody burden for the industry, right? We know it's happened in the past, but we're looking at bringing in savings for it, or at least cost neutral without all the regulatory footprint that we apply now. In 2018, we had an industry consultation session. We went out to the public and we talked about the reg regime that was in place in the FAA, in New Zealand, in Canada, and in EASA. We asked everybody what they thought about the current regs. Well, I don't think you need me to tell you what they thought about that. We asked them what they thought about the other regs, and the overwhelming response was, we like the FARs, we want you to go down the FAA route. And we agree. We think that's a workable way to do it. And that's what we propose to do. So, What's it apply to? Everything that we normally call GA actually means private aerial work, flying training, and all those things up on the screen there. It does not include operations where passengers are carried for payment. And that's passengers, not participants, as in aerial work. So charter and RPT and the like are not included. We're not touching that. We're not touching self-administration. That's being handled separately. So the RAOs, the SAAA, the Balloon Federation, all those people, they're different projects. We're looking at GA, General Aviation, private and aerial work, and the maintenance thereof. Okay. The key changes. The changes we're making, not many actually. When you compare what we have now to what we're proposing, there are a lot of similarities. What is different is the complexity. We are going down a much less complex path. We're taking away the need for a maintenance organisation approval for Car 30. So if you have a licence that lets you do maintenance, you can do that maintenance. If you want to set up a business and do that maintenance under your licence, you can do so. We're taking away the requirement for type ratings, but this only applies to GA. So if you have a type rating already, well, that's a valid thing to have for both GA and in the Part 145, Part 42 145 world. However, in GA, we recognise the cost of getting a type rating can be as much as $80,000. To do what? Sometimes it's only to change a bloody wheel, you know. So we're looking at reducing the costs, the difficulties associated with doing the maintenance that your licence says you have the knowledge, the competency and the hand skills, the maturity to do. We're taking away the maintenance release form, complex form. A lot of the complaints I've had over the last 20 years have been about problems with that maintenance release form. Okay, so the maintenance release form will go. What will replace it? Well, it'll be the release to service, which I'll get to that a bit further down. Schedule 5 will also go, but it will be replaced by something I'll get to further down as well. Appendix D of Part 43. So, inspection authorisations. They're new. That's a new authorisation. It's something that's applied. That will be issued to B1 lamies, not to B2s, because it requires airframe and engine capabilities. Because the IA, whose role we will get to later, has some pretty broad-reaching but very important safety responsibilities. The release to service. Now, this is what's going to replace the maintenance release. And this is one of the things that the FAA do that is beautifully simple, and I think it's urgently needed. When one carries out maintenance in the future, there was a rectification or modification or something like that, and I'll talk about modifications a bit further on. But you have to make a maintenance record entry just like you make now. As I said, a lot of what we're going to be doing in the future will be much the same as what we're doing now. You've got to make a maintenance record entry. You've got to put down certain things, a description of what you've done, who you are, why you're allowed to make the certification, in other words, your authorisation number, your signature and your date. If you do an inspection, then your release to service is slightly different, because when you do a 100-hourly or an annual inspection, you're certifying that the aircraft has been inspected and is airworthy. When you do a certification just for maintenance, that's not a certification that the aircraft is airworthy. Oh no. You're certifying that you have done some maintenance which you've described in your maintenance record, and that your signature says that that work has been done in accordance with the requirements of the Part 43, and that is a release to service for that maintenance item only. If you do an annual inspection, you have to have it released to service by the holder of an IA. And there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about the IA's role a bit further on again. Minor, major mods, acceptable repairs, acceptable data, mandatory data. In the new world, modifications will be broken up into minor and major. Major modifications are defined now in Appendix A of FAR Part 43, and that, you've got a copy of that there. And if the work you're doing isn't described in that appendix, it's minor. What's the difference? If it's a major mod, you have to use data that has been approved under Part 21, and there's pretty broad scope there for that. If it's a minor mod, you don't have to have any data approval, but you must use data that's acceptable. And that covers a broad scope of things. AC 4313 is a good example. And even if you haven't seen it used before, if you think this is acceptable, you can use it. And if CASA thinks, we don't agree, we have to prove that it would not have been acceptable to us. Because it's a minor mod, we're taking a very more lenient look, a very, very relaxed position on it. Okay, and we also publish a list of acceptable data, but it will not be an exhaustive list. That's guidance. There'll be miles of other stuff that can be pulled in. Task-based competencies. I know this is one that has caused a little bit of discussion. Because we're doing away with the need to have aircraft type ratings, we are saying that if it's a type rated aircraft and you don't have that type rating, and you have to do a maintenance task on it, if you haven't done it before, then you have to do it. Or if it's not a basic privilege of your license, you haven't done it before, or you haven't been trained on it somehow, and you don't have that type rating, you can do it the first time under the supervision of somebody who does meet one of those criteria. And having done that to their satisfaction, you are then able to, in future, perform that work yourself. Now, we're not going to legislate how you record that, but if ever you're required to prove it, the onus of proof will be on the LAMI. So I recommend that you all, when you do these things, these task-based assessments, that you keep a record, keep your own logbook or whatever, or just keep sheets in your shoebox. Doesn't matter. Just make sure you have them available. Okay, we'll move on. For registered operators, we've got some ROs here. Yeah, okay, well if you're an RO, your responsibilities haven't changed all that much. You're still responsible for making sure that your aircraft is airworthy. The paradigm has been over the years that your LAMI, your maintenance organisation, has carried that burden for you. And they do the logbook reviews and they make sure the ADs are up to date and all those things and keep you legal. However, from now on, we are making it clear that it's a registered operator's responsibility, not the LAMI. If you've got a car, your service station's not responsible for keeping it roadworthy, you are. So, no change, we're just emphasising it. Compliance with airworthiness limitations, that's no change. We say that now in CAR 100.5 that you must comply with AWLs. Compliance with ADs, well, we all know you've got to do them, but we come after you. You've got to make sure that the maintenance is properly recorded and properly released to service by an appropriately rated person, nothing new on that. And ensuring that the record of the aircraft time and service, aircraft weight and balance, all those things are kept up to date. You've still got to do that. What we're not doing anymore is telling you in prescriptive, painful detail how you must do it. Okay. Maintenance organisation approvals, no longer required for aircraft maintenance. I know there are a lot of our 30 holders here. It's not as bad as it might sound. Maintenance certified and aircraft released by LAMIs under their licence. In all other respects, nothing changes. And I've got to say, as a Car 30 organisation now, when that aircraft gets its maintenance release issued, it has to be issued after LAMI has signed for all the work in the organisation. So that's not really a big change. The difference is that you don't have to have a CASA approval to do it. No longer required to have procedures manuals, quality manuals, whatever you want to call it. Quality systems, internal audits. No need to get CASA approval to change what you're doing. If you want to add a location, if you want to move your whole business, if you want to add helicopters and you're going to be doing aeroplanes, you want to add turbine engine, you want to do engine overhaul. You can do anything that's under the scope of the people with licences working in your organisation without coming to us. We've done a few, considered a few of these things. We're aware that getting a maintenance organisation approval, currently there's probably about as much as $35,000 in costs that could be attributed to the need to have us approve them. Take that off out of the mix, it becomes affordable for a lamey then to go and set up in a smaller town where there might not be the volume of business to support those massive overheads of getting started. It allows for an expansion of maintenance facilities further out into the remoter areas. Vastly improved opportunities for people to set up their own business. Now, for the existing Car 30 holders, I know there is some concern that this will bring in a bit of competition. It may, but be mindful that the existing organisations are established. You have the infrastructure, you have the data, the equipment to cover a broad range of aircraft. A lamey starting up won't have all of that, so they're very limited in what they can do. And they cannot do work. It is an offence, it will be an offence, as it is in America, to do a job if you don't have the necessary instructions for doing it, and if you don't understand them, and if you don't apply them, and if you don't do the work to an acceptable airworthiness standard, using the tools, methods, techniques, and practices as specified in that data. So the lamey starting up, he's not going to have a ute and a Swiss pocket knife. All right? Well, if he does, he's only going to go and tighten up a split pin on a wheel nut. Still required, well, I've talked about that. Now, instruments. There are two things that the lamey will not be able to do as an independent lamey on their licence. One is track an instrument and do work on it. That's got to go to a Part 145 or a B2. A B2 will be allowed to set up and do some of this work. Propellers, they can't do major repairs or major overhauls to propellers any more than you can now. They also have to go to a 145. Okay, next. Yeah, so future, I've probably gotten ahead of myself a bit here, so bear with me. Certainly we're going to remove some barriers, there are others of course, but the barriers that we've imposed over the years will be taken away. Now the lamey can go off and set up a business without any discussion with CASA. If they've got a licence, they can set up business, provide maintenance. To get started, you don't have to first off have a hangar with all the infrastructure in there and all the data and tools and equipment, all sitting there, costing money, doing nothing while you wait for us. So these things can drag out, as you know. You now need to have the independent quality system. The quality system, let's face it, the smaller aircraft in GA, what do you need to make sure you have a good outcome every time or the same outcome every time? You need the manufacturer's instructions, you need regulations that tell you to use them, you need a person who is competent, qualified and licensed or supervised by a person who is licensed doing the work. You've got all those things, you've got safety. Everything else is unbubblets. Expansion costs, no fees. And we know it can cost anything up to $2,000-3,000 sometimes if you want to add a location or add a type of maintenance activity to your Car 30 approval. Now you don't have to pay that, you just do it. The IA, that's an individual authorisation, as compared to getting set up with a Car 30 approval, getting an IA authorisation will be a doddle. I mean, it won't be just say, yeah, I want it, you get a rubber stamp. You're going to have the required experience as required in the FAA. It's 3 years as a lamey, 2 years doing the type of work that you want to be an IA for. You have to set an examination, and that'll cost you a fee of some sort. Everything we do is cost recoverable. We intend to keep that nominal for quite a few years, or for the first few years anyway, as a transition thing. And we have some other transitional things I'll talk to you a bit further on. Okay, you've still got to have the appropriate data, tools and equipment, right? Whether or not we approve it, you've still got to have them, you've still got to use them, you've still got to follow the rules, or you're in breach of regulation and you're subject to enforcement action. Okay. We are going to be like most of the other major NAAs in the world. We're going to have one form of maintenance organisation approval only. That'll be Part 145. Everything else will be done under Part 43. And in the US, the FAA only have 145s for internal maintenance organisations that are the same as 145 for airlines. Doing maintenance for airlines and air charter or air transport. Charter in the US is maintained under Part 43, but we haven't got a position on that yet here. That'll be worked out next year. Cars will cease to exist once we have finished resolving all these issues. Getting 145 workable for the small end of town, sorting out what we're doing with charter and Part 135. When all that's done, the 88 rigs will be wound up and good riddance. The review for 145 will be aimed, as I've said before, at simplifying for the bottom end of town. Let's face it, if you're a Car 30 organisation, you're doing everything that you need to do, right? There's not much difference between a Car 30 and a 145. That's been more in the implementation than in the regulation that has made it so difficult for you guys who want to go up to 145. And we're cognizant of that, we're working on it. We will be making sure that future guidance material and training for our inspectors ensures that if you're a Car 30, you're not going to have to spend a bucket of money on a manual to become a Part 145. You will have to have a manual, but you will be able, mostly, we hope, presume, to incorporate what you're already doing as a Car 30. It's working there in Car 30 land, why can't it work somewhere else? Car 30 will continue to cover charter aircraft, as we've said, until we've finished this regular reform program. Everything okay so far? Am I going too fast for anybody? Can you all hear me and understand me? Cool. Inspection schedules. This is probably not all that much different to what's in the place now, except that it's far less complex. If you have an aircraft that's not on some sort of an inspection program, you just use Appendix D of FAR 43. And let me tell you, Appendix D is simpler than our Schedule 5. It does pick up helicopters. Some people will think that's good and some won't. However, it does, working over there. Some aircraft will have to have something different. And they are large aircraft, greater than 5,700 kilos. They will have to have an inspection program approved by CASA or an authorised person. And that will basically rely on the manufacturer program or something similar. Similar to, if you've got a system of maintenance now, that will be approved. If you have a multi-engine turbine-powered aircraft, either turboprop or turbojet, it will also have to be on an approved inspection schedule. Otherwise, Appendix D. Now, Appendix D, that's the 100 hourly. If you're doing flying training or aerial work, as well as doing the annual inspection, Appendix D, you also have to do 100 hourly. No different to now. The difference is that the 100 hourly is signed out by the layman who does it, in the story. The annual can be signed off by the layman, but it has to be released to service by an IA. Now, helicopters, you can see the screen, you can all read, so I'm not going to bore you by reading it out to you. But Appendix D includes those requirements. the dynamics, the things that make a helicopter something other than a big aluminium box, right, they're required to be inspected using the manufacturer's instructions for the inspection. Not the inspection intervals, but using the instructions for carrying out the inspection. Schedule 5, certainly if somebody's using Schedule 5 for a fixed-wing aeroplane, it will meet the requirements of Appendix D, it will exceed it. So no need to change if you don't want it. Most current systems are well, they all will. If you've got a system of maintenance or inspection schedule approved now, it's going to be automatically approved under the new system. No change. Okay. If an aircraft's on an inspection program, the RO has to nominate the person who's going to oversight it. Well, it's pretty similar now. Now I think we call it a maintenance controller. You've got to make sure that a copy of the program is available to whoever's doing the inspection. Pretty similar. Turbine engines, you've got to do all the mandatory retirement and overhaul intervals, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. Aerial work, including flying training, aid work, all those people, they have to have 100 hourlies as well as the annuals. And I've mentioned what happens with large aircraft and multi-engine turbine, so we can move on. Thanks, Fiona. The IA, held by an individual, that has to be a B1 licence, minimum of 3 years experience, and you've got to have engines. If you've got an engine exclusion, you can't do it. The initial exam and then ongoing currency requirements. So it'll be issued for 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, you either have to have met certain experience requirements, which are set out in FARs, or you can do a professional development course, or a refresher course that's approved by CASA, or set an exam. The details are not yet finalised, but there will be ways of doing it. If you're in a quiet area and you can't get the necessary number of annual inspections or major modification inspections in the requisite time, there will be other ways to renew your IA. The important jobs, as we mentioned, compliance with type certification basis during the annual, and that's different to now, and that's a big one. That the IA must, as part of their signing off of the annual inspection, they're checking that that aircraft conforms to its type certification basis as properly altered. Making sure all mandatory maintenance requirements are being carried out, that's airworthiness directives and airworthiness limitations. If there's a major modification being carried out on an aircraft, the difference now is that the LAMI can't just certify it, sign it off as done. It has to be inspected for conformity by the IA. That sometimes might require the IA being involved at the start or at times during the process of the modification, so that the IA can be satisfied that conformity is being achieved. And the IA will be supervising progressive inspection schedules. So if you're not on an inspection schedule, if you're on Appendix D, you can break it up into a progressive inspection, similar to what you can do now with Schedule 5. Okay, from the middle. Transition. With the IAs, we recognise that if we have a cut-off date, and from here on we've got to have an IA to sign up an annual inspection for a major modification, we've got a problem because we've got no IAs. And we're unlikely to have that mechanism in place and enough people trained, examined and authorised before the cut-off date, which means that the industry will come to a screeching halt. Well, we're not here, we're not about that. So what we will do at the transition period, people who are authorised now to issue a maintenance release on behalf of a maintenance organisation, LAMIs that is, will be given an IA. And that IA will be good for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, they will have to sit the examination to renew it. Is that good or bad? That's good. There's nothing bad about it because the IA will be doing what he's been doing for all those years beforehand, issuing an aircraft some sort of a release to service after an annual inspection, or signing off a major modification. Usually the chief engineer does that. So, no change really. Okay, next. Okay, the type-rated aircraft. We've talked about that a bit. The airframe or engine category, the type must be within the category of their licence. And if you've satisfactorily performed the task before, you can do it. If you haven't, then you can do it under the supervision of somebody who has, and then you can do it. Or you can be trained on it, or you can hold a type rating. The proof of competency remains with the layman, so if you're doing a job on an aircraft for an aircraft owner, or for another layman, who's contracting you to do something, they're entitled to ask you if this is a type-rated aircraft to show that you have gained that competency. And that's why I recommended earlier that you keep a record. It will be an offence if you're doing that work and you can't show that you're competent, qualified to do it. So if you've got a type rating, no problem. But if you haven't got a type rating, you need to have some system of being able to verify, if ever you're asked to, that you have achieved that competency somehow. Okay, important point, this doesn't carry across. This is Part 43 maintenance, GA. So you can't take it across and use those privileges in Part 42, Part 145. That's up to Part 145 organisation, what they let you do. But if it's a type-rated job, then you'll need a type rating to be the certifying engineer. Now with the actual privileges, I think it's easier to follow if what we're saying here is the airframe type aeroplane or helicopter. Well, it means if you're a B1.1 layman, you can still do, at 1.1, 1.2, you can do work on helicopter airframes because take out the rotor bits, they're pretty straightforward. But you can't do work on the helicopter control systems. You're going to have a helicopter rating, the helicopter license, 1.3, 1.4. Engine type, if you've only got piston engines, well, you can't do task-based competency training on a turbine engine. You have to have the basic turbine engine competencies that come with a B1.1 or 1.3 licence. But that's all spelled out more clearly in those fact sheets that you've got on the seats. I'm happy to talk about it later when we get to the end. How you're holding up? I'll put them on the seat. Yeah. Well done. Okay, maintenance records. Pretty simple. When you make a record of maintenance in the maintenance records, your maintainer's responsibility is to write in there what was done, what data was used, details of any mandatory life-limited parts that have been added or changed, and then you need the certification, your signature, your date, your ARN, the ARN, and that forms a release to service after a maintenance job. You don't need to write this aircraft is now released to service. The signature forms the release to service, and that will stay so in the regs. The maintenance release form will become redundant. However, some people like it. They like to use it for tracking maintenance, tracking aircraft flight hours. Nothing wrong with that. Keep using it if you want. But you can't get into trouble for not using it or not using it correctly. It's yours to use as you see fit, as part of your record-keeping equipment. Okay, moving on. Return to service after an annual. If the aircraft, if it's an annual inspection and the aircraft is serviceable, the IA returns it to service by recording a statement that the annual inspection is being carried out and the aircraft is airworthy. So this is the only time when somebody's saying that the whole aircraft is airworthy. Then the normal thing, signature, the date and the ARN. But that's if the aircraft is airworthy. Now when you do an annual inspection as an IA, and I suspect that many of you will be IAs, when you do an annual inspection you must make a certification at the end. You either approve it or disapprove it for return to service. Okay, now if you do the annual and there are things that are not right, well then you write up that you've done an annual inspection and you state that you have given the registered owner, the registered operator, a list of defects. In that list of defects that you give the registered operator, you write out the defects, you sign it and you date it. Right? But you don't have to list all those defects on the maintenance records. You give that to the RO. It's the RO's job then to deal with those defects. Because they're defects and as an annual inspection, they have to be fixed. The RO can engage the IA to do it if they want. There's nothing stops you doing the work and releasing it to service. As an IA can do the annual inspection and then release it to service. They can do a major mod, can form it and release it to service. There's nothing anywhere that says you can't do those things. But a layman who's not an IA can't do some of those things. Okay, when the RO gets that list of defects after an annual inspection, he can get you to fix it, he can get somebody else to fix it, or he can get a special flight permit and take it somewhere to get it fixed. So, no big deal. Yeah, it's a little bit better than what we have now, because at least you can get the thing in, get the annual done, your obligations have been met, move on, what's next? Okay, we'll do the same. Mandatory. Move on one there. Mandatory maintenance requirements. This is an interesting one. The Americans have a very enlightened attitude to this. And I'll spell it out for you in a minute. But what's mandatory in America is airworthiness limitations that have been approved by the State of Design NAA at time of manufacture. Airworthiness directives are mandatory to whatever aircraft they refer to in the directive. A direction issued by CASA or the NAA that is applicable to the aircraft, any other form of direction. We used to give Car 38 directions, I think. Instructions for continuing airworthiness that have been adopted by the RO as the aircraft inspections program. Now, where that happens, as I mentioned before, if it's a large aircraft or a multi-engine turbine aircraft, it has to be on a manufacturer's recommended schedule or something similar. Any requirements in the regulation that say you must do something, well, you've still got to do them. What's not mandatory are ICAs that have not been mandated by CASA or the State of Design NAA, which means that you've got an aircraft that's being maintained in a Part 43 and you're following Appendix D. You must comply with the airworthiness directives, airworthiness limitations, any specific directions by CASA or some other NAA that's relevant, and the regs. Whatever else is in the manufacturer's maintenance instructions is recommended. The only thing that's mandatory in the manufacturer's instructions are those bits listed in Section 4 as AWLs, as approved by the NAA. The rest is guidance, unless you're on a program that uses the manufacturer's data. Now, currency. Airworthiness limitations for 1962 Cessna 182 do not change at any time. They are the airworthiness limitations for that aircraft till the day it goes back into the smelter. Further down the track, later variations of that 182 will have more or different airworthiness limitations. They don't apply retrospectively. So previous aircraft are still maintained to the basis of their certification. Airworthiness directives are one of the ways that the CASA or the NAA can make that retrospective. So if there's been a change in airworthiness limitations for a model of aircraft, if your aircraft's not listed in it, it doesn't apply to you unless there's an AD that says it does. If you're on a inspection program that uses the manufacturer's instructions, the instructions that are relevant to you are those instructions that are in force at the time you adopted that manufacturer's program. So after that, the manufacturer may issue alerts, bulletins, dog whistles, whatever. They don't apply to you. What applies to you is what was approved at the time that you took on that program. we have a problem these days in Australia because there's no certainty. You take on an inspection program and you don't know what you might be required to do 5 years down the track. The FAA say that only the FAA can make you do maintenance. So there will be, there's a change in thinking there. Of course, if something comes out in a manufacturer's service bulletin and the FAA or CASA thinks that this is important because it's critical to safety, we'll make it a directive. But if we don't make it a directive, it's guidance. And as I say, that's only guidance for those aircraft that have not that have not already been locked in place. So if another aircraft comes on 2 years further down the track, takes on a manufacturing inspection program, then all the bulletins and alerts and everything else that were in force at that time are all applicable, but not what comes afterwards. It just gives you a bit of certainty on what you're going to be expected to do. I think that pretty well covers that one. Major mods and repairs. They're defined by a list in Part 43, Appendix A of Part 43. Must be carried out using approved data under Part 21, must be certified by a LAMI, and must be inspected for conformity and released to service by the holder of an IA. Minor mods and repairs carried out using acceptable data, 4313 for example, be certified by a LAMI, no need for conformity inspections by an IA, no need for the data to be approved by anybody. Next one, thanks. Yeah. So where we're up to. We expect to finalise a policy on this by the end of this year. I've got a lot of time left, but we're getting there. The legal drafting will commence early next year, and once we've got a consultation draft, we will publish that and consult on that, and we'll be asking you to ensure that we haven't pulled any trickies. Whatever we have put on in that document you've got there, they're the policies that we are going to make into law. And I'll talk to you a little bit about reading them too in a second. We hope to have the regulation made before the middle of next year, and will commence in 2020. There will be a transition period to allow people to get ready for this. Because we have to train the inspectors, we have to educate the industry, there's a lot to be done. Are they safe? Well, the USA has the largest GA fleet in the world, 260 to 270,000 aircraft in the GA fleet. In more than 50 years working on these regs, their accident rate is marginally lower than ours in GA. We're 1.3 and we're 1.9 fatal accidents per million flight hours. I think are the numbers, but don't hold me to that. I've got a perforated memory. So their safety statistics are pretty good. Maintenance, let's talk particularly about maintenance. Over a 14-year period, the USA, FAA, ATSB, they analysed fatal accidents. And they looked at them all, and they worked out that about 7% of those accidents were in some way attributable to maintenance. So we've got 1.3 fatal accidents in a million flying hours, of which 7% are maintenance related. I'll put it to you, we don't have a safety concern here. Okay, that's it.